I was sitting with my younger brother Tony at his house, watching him fumble through Tinder. He swiped left, then right, trying to drown out the memory of his latest breakup. His face was focused, eyes scanning each profile, but none seemed to catch his interest. "You think you're ever going to find someone on here?" I teased, taking a sip of my beer. Tony grunted in response, his finger continuing to scroll through the endless stream of faces. Maybe, who knows, right? But then he stopped. His finger hovered over one profile for a moment, and he turned the phone toward me, an amused grin forming on his face. "Listen, this one seems okay, except she looks suspiciously like your wife." I blinked, feeling a strange jolt in my chest. I leaned in to get a closer look at the screen. There, staring back at me, was a woman with long brown hair, the same soft smile, and even that familiar sparkle in her eyes. But it couldn't be. "Tony, come on, man. My wife's name is Melissa, not Sophia, and this girl's 30. Melissa's 41. Tony shrugged, still holding out the phone. "Yeah, I know, but you gotta admit, they could be twins." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You've had too much to drink already." But as I turned back to the TV, something gnawed at the back of my mind. The resemblance was uncanny, and no matter how I tried to laugh it off, I couldn't shake the image of that woman from my head. For the next few minutes, we tossed out wild theories, joking about the idea that Melissa could have some secret life I didn't know about. "Maybe she's living a double life," Tony laughed. "Or maybe she's just moonlighting as a 30-year-old on the weekends." We laughed, but deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. Something felt off. My gut twisted with that uncomfortable sensation you get when things don't add up. Could it really just be a coincidence? I sat there, pretending to focus on the game, but my mind was elsewhere. Tony took another sip of his beer and leaned back on the couch, tapping through his phone again. "You know," he started, "I've been reading a lot about how to use Tinder better. There's all this advice out there, tons of blogs, videos, and whatnot. Apparently, it's harder to find someone serious nowadays. Most people just want something quick, no strings attached." He sighed, shaking his head. "But hey, I still think I can meet someone decent on here. Better than my ex, at least." I nodded, but his words stirred something uneasy inside me. The conversation was light, but I couldn't ignore the odd feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach since seeing that profile. The idea of Melissa, even just a lookalike, being on Tinder left a bitter taste in my mouth. Tony scrolled back to Sophia's profile and laughed. "You know, maybe I should just write to her. See what happens, right?" Before I even knew what I was saying, the words flew out of my mouth. "Don't." It came out sharper than I intended, and Tony's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He turned to look at me, confusion and amusement dancing in his eyes. "Whoa, easy there," he chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't know you felt that strongly about it." I blinked, trying to shrug it off, but I could feel the tension in my shoulders. "I don't know," I muttered. "Just doesn't feel right." Tony smiled, that same teasing grin I'd seen since we were kids. Okay, Ethan, you know me. I'm your little brother. I respect your decisions, or at least your requests." He took one last look at the screen before swiping left, Sophia disappearing into the sea of profiles. But as Tony shifted his focus back to his phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why had I reacted like that? Why did I care so much about some random girl on Tinder? I glanced at the beer bottle in my hand, turning it slowly between my fingers. Maybe it was just the resemblance. Maybe it was nothing at all. But my gut told me otherwise. After hanging out with Tony, I headed home, the uneasiness still gnawing at me. The whole thing with that Tinder profile kept playing over and over in my mind. It was probably nothing, but still, I couldn't shake it. Sophia's face, so much like Melissa's, kept flashing in my head, and Tony's comment about people using Tinder for quick flings didn't help. As I drove, my thoughts drifted to Melissa. She's a writer, someone with a vivid imagination who could weave any story into life. Her favorite genre is romance, stories about love, relationships, betrayal, cheating even. I always found it ironic that Melissa wrote so much about infidelity, considering how much we've talked about trust being the foundation of our marriage. We had a solid understanding. She's passionate about her work, and I support that. She often spends time outside the house, meeting with editors, fellow writers, publishers. I never questioned it because it was part of her job. But if anyone had the freedom and opportunity to live a double life, Melissa would be in the perfect position. I shook the thought out of my head. I was probably being paranoid, letting that profile get to me. I wasn't going to turn into one of those overly suspicious husbands, snooping through her things without reason. We've always had a rule. Personal space is sacred. I trusted Melissa, and we both believed that suspicion without proof could destroy a relationship. I used to joke that we had a democracy at home, where everyone was free to be themselves. But trust is a funny thing. Sometimes, all it takes is one little seed of doubt to throw everything off balance. By the time I got home, I had decided I couldn't just ask Melissa outright. What would I even say? Hey, honey, I saw a girl on Tinder who looks like you. Are you leading a double life? Yeah, that wouldn't go well. So I figured I'd check for anything suspicious without breaking our rules too much. I sat down at my desk, my laptop glowing in the dim light of the room. I wasn't sure where to start, but then I remembered Melissa's Google profile was saved in the browser. It was harmless enough, just a quick look. If nothing was there, I could stop worrying. I opened the browser and clicked on her profile. To my surprise, the password was already saved. She had probably logged in here before without thinking. I felt a twinge of guilt, but curiosity pushed me forward. I opened her email, scrolling through messages. Everything seemed normal. Work emails, notes from friends, book club invitations. Nothing that screamed suspicious. Then something caught my eye. A couple of old notifications from Tinder, buried deep in her inbox. They were technical messages, the kind you get when you sign up or reset your password. My heart started pounding. I scrolled through the messages, noticing that they stopped abruptly a while ago. It looked like Melissa had turned off the notifications. Why would she have a Tinder account? And why hide it? I sat back, staring at the screen. While Melissa was out, the anxiety gnawing at me refused to settle down. I knew I couldn't let this sit without doing something, so I grabbed my phone and called Tony. Being 10 years younger, Tony was more tech-savvy than me. Maybe he could figure out what to do next. The phone rang a couple of times before Tony picked up. Yo, what's up, big bro? I hesitated for a second, feeling a little ridiculous. Listen, Tony, I need your advice. You know how I said Melissa's probably not on Tinder? Well, I found a couple of old Tinder notifications in her email. There was silence on the other end before Tony burst out laughing. Wait, are you serious? Tinder notifications. Maybe she's just doing research for one of her stories, man. I chuckled weakly, but the unease didn't leave. Yeah, maybe, but it's still weird. She turned off the notifications. What if she had an account and I didn't know about it? Tony's laughter faded and his tone turned more serious. Okay, that's a little strange. Are you sure it's not some old, forgotten account? I don't know, man, I sighed. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this is just messing with my head. I need to figure this out without being a paranoid fool. Tony paused, then spoke with a nervous edge. Yeah, I get it. It's like, what if it's nothing, but what if it's something, right? He paused again, then laughed lightly. You always said I owe you one, for that time you dealt with those hooligans who were bullying me back in the day. I guess it's time to repay that debt. I grinned, remembering that day. Tony had been about 12, and a couple of punks at school had been giving him a hard time. I showed up, had a few words with them, and the problem disappeared real quick. Now, it seemed like the tables had turned. You remember that, huh? I said, trying to keep the mood light. Well, it's your turn, little brother. You're going to help me figure this out. Tony's voice got firm, with that same loyalty I always admired in him. I'm ready for any adventure, Ethan. Give me a couple of days, and we'll get to the bottom of this. I'll do some digging, and you come by the house. We'll figure it out together. Relief washed over me. At least, I wasn't alone in this. Thanks, Tony. I'll see you in a couple of days. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Whatever was happening, I knew Tony had my back. But the question still hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. What if Melissa was hiding something? This is a wild story, I know. You're probably thinking, how did this guy let it get this far? But trust me, when you're in the thick of something like this, it's not easy to make clear-headed decisions. It's like walking through fog. You can't see straight, and every step feels like it could be the wrong one. So yeah, the details matter. They matter because they explain why I couldn't just ask Melissa outright, or why I didn't just drop it after finding those old Tinder notifications. You see, when you've been married as long as I have, 14 years to be exact, you don't jump to conclusions. I had to tread carefully. But at the same time, how could I ignore this? If it was true, if Melissa was hiding something, well, I needed to know. Anyone in my shoes would have been tangled up in the same web of confusion. I'm waiting for your comments. You can write that I'm a stupid idiot, or on the contrary, support me in this. Write right now. But when you listen to this story to the end, don't forget to give me new advice. So a few days later, I went to see Tony, and let me tell you, this guy had outdone himself. When I walked into his place, he was practically glowing with excitement. "Check this out, Ethan," he said, barely able to contain his grin. He pulled out his laptop and showed me what he'd been working on. It was a fake Tinder profile for a guy named Dennis, but not just any guy. This was a rich, jet-setting, model-handsome guy. And the kicker, the photos were created using Midjourney, so Dennis wasn't even real. But man, did he look real. Tony couldn't stop smiling, proud of his creation. "I told you I'd come up with something," he said, showing off the profile. "Meet Dennis, the millionaire. He's charming, mysterious, and get this, he's totally into women like Melissa." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to catch my wife with a fake profile?" Tony laughed. "Exactly. We're going to see if she bites. This is live bait, brother." I'll admit, I was stunned. I never imagined we'd be creating a fictional person to lure my own wife. But looking at how detailed the plan was, I couldn't help but feel a little impressed. Dennis looked legitimate. Everything was crafted to be perfect, from his luxury lifestyle to the subtle hints in his profile that would appeal to someone like Melissa, who's always been drawn to romance and stories of complicated relationships. Tony could see the hesitation in my eyes. "Don't worry," he said. "You won't have to talk to her. I'll handle the messages." I even used artificial intelligence to help me come up with a romantic writing style based on some of Melissa's stories. "I've got this down, Ethan." He showed me a few test messages, and honestly, they were good. Better than anything I could have come up with. He was blending just the right amount of flattery, mystery, and romantic intrigue, things I recognized from Melissa's favorite storylines. All I could do was wait and watch. Tony was confident, almost too confident, but I had my doubts. Sure, Sophia looked like Melissa, but that didn't mean they were the same person. I hoped deep down that Tony would come back to me in a few days saying, "Well, Sophia's not Melissa after all." But hope is a tricky thing. It keeps you going, even when you're staring down a truth you're not sure you want to face. I wished both Tony and myself good luck as we embarked on this insane plan. All I could do now was wait, carry on with life as usual, and pretend nothing was wrong. For almost a month, everything was calm. Melissa acted the same. Nothing in her behavior raised any red flags. I kept my eyes open, though, watched her a little closer than usual. Still, there was nothing. Maybe Tony and I were making a big deal out of nothing. Every few days, I'd call Tony to check in on his progress. He was always in high spirits, like a kid with a shiny new toy. "Bro, you wouldn't believe how many women are messaging Dennis," he'd say, half laughing, half amazed. "They're sending all sorts of, let's just say, explicit photos." I listened, sometimes laughing with him, other times just shaking my head in disbelief. The crazy part was, it was all working. This fake millionaire persona Tony had created was reeling people in left and right. But then one day, Tony dropped a bomb. "Ethan, I got in touch with Sophia." I tensed up immediately. "And?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay calm, bro," Tony said, clearly trying to reassure me. "It's under control. We're just chatting right now. Nothing serious yet. But I'll tell you when it's time to worry." He sounded confident, but I knew Tony well enough to realize he was holding back some details. He probably didn't want me freaking out before we even got to the end of the plan. Still, I trusted him. If anyone could navigate this situation, it was Tony. Meanwhile, at home, Melissa was as normal as ever. She was writing, going to her usual meetings, laughing with me over dinner. It was like nothing was different. If there was one thing I realized during this time, it was that I would have made a terrible psychologist or detective. I couldn't read a single thing off her. If she was hiding something, she was doing an incredible job of keeping it under wraps. Then, out of nowhere, Tony called me up and asked to meet. I could tell by his voice that something big was about to happen. We met up, and Tony's eyes were practically glowing with excitement. "Ethan," he said, "there's going to be a meeting with Sophia." I froze and I stammered. "What do you mean, a meeting?" "Relax, man. I've already organized everything," Tony said, grinning like he had just won the lottery. He went on to explain that he had rented a house, an expensive luxury house, to match the persona of Dennis. All you have to do is be there. When Sophia, Melissa, shows up, you'll be there instead of Denis. I felt like I had just been punched in the gut. "Tony, this is too much," I protested. "I don't know if I can do this." Tony just laughed. "It's already set, Ethan. This is your chance to find out the truth. You've come this far. Are you really going to back out now?" I didn't have a choice anymore. Everything was in motion. I had to see this through, no matter how insane it all felt. I took a deep breath, nodded, and agreed. So in a few days, I would be waiting in that house. If Sophia showed up, and if Sophia really was Melissa, then I'd finally get my answers. The day of the meeting finally arrived, and to say I was nervous would be an understatement. My stomach felt like it was tied in knots. That morning, I got up earlier than usual and began getting ready under the pretext of going to work, even though I'd taken the day off. I needed an excuse to leave the house without raising Melissa's suspicions. But as I was getting ready, I noticed something strange. Melissa was also preparing for the day, carefully choosing a dress. She wasn't in any rush, though, since her so-called meeting wasn't until the evening. When I casually asked her about it, she said she had an important meeting with some publishers and editors for her new story, a big book she'd been working on. But as she spoke, I realized it was all a lie. The way she said it, the forced casualness in her voice, I could just feel it. This was it. She was lying to me, and I was walking right into the thick of it. Still, I decided to play along. Tony had put so much into this, and if I backed out now, I'd never get the truth. So I smiled, wished her good luck, and left the house. I arrived at the rented house Tony had secured for the meeting. It was even more extravagant than I'd imagined. Tony was already there, buzzing with excitement. The place looked like something out of a romantic movie. Roses, candles, rose petals scattered across the floor. It was almost over the top, and I couldn't help but ask, "Tony, what the hell? Why all the theatrics?" He grinned at me, clearly pleased with himself. "Everything has to be perfect, Ethan. We're pulling out all the stops. Dennis is a millionaire, remember? The setting needs to match the fantasy. Trust me, it's all part of the plan." I shook my head, but deep down, I knew there was no turning back now. Tony had even prepared a formal suit for me. "You've got to look the part," he said. "If she shows up and sees you in this, there won't be any doubt in her mind." "To hell with this," I muttered, putting on the suit. There was no time to retreat, and frankly, no point. Tony checked me over, making sure everything was in place. The man was completely absorbed in his scheme. Before he left, Tony gave me a pat on the back. "Look, I've got to run some errands, but when she arrives, you let me know immediately. I'll be nearby just in case." And with that, I was alone, in this posh, overly romantic house waiting for Sophia, or most likely Melissa. My heart pounded as the minutes ticked by. This was it, the moment of truth. Before the truth comes out, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell to receive notifications. You shouldn't miss many more extravagant stories. It was getting late, and I could feel the tension building as the moment approached. Tony called me, sounding more excited than ever. "She's on her way, Ethan," he said. "Get ready. Remember, stand with your back to the door so she doesn't recognize you right away." "What is this, some kind of spy movie?" I muttered, but I agreed. The whole thing felt ridiculous, but I was too deep into this mess to stop now. Tony told me he was waiting at a cafe about 10 minutes away and that I should call him when everything was over. I stood by the door, facing away from the entrance, like some character in a bad drama. My heart raced, but weirdly, I felt a strange calm wash over me too, as if my mind had already accepted whatever was about to happen. I heard the door open and then her voice, familiar, soft, and full of surprise. "Oh, wow! I thought there'd be a party here or something. but this looks like a romantic dinner for two. I'm impressed, Dennis. You're quite the romantic. Her words hit me like a hammer, but I stayed still for a second, letting them sink in. She really thought I was Dennis. I turned slowly, and there she was, my wife, dressed beautifully, looking radiant. A part of me, a foolish part, hoped for a moment that maybe this was all still a misunderstanding. But then her face changed. She froze when she saw me, a flicker of panic crossing her expression. She blinked, as if trying to process what was happening, her voice shaky when she spoke again. Denis? I don't know why, but I was calm, almost too calm for what was unfolding in front of me. I took a breath and spoke evenly, my voice steady. Well, apparently you came here to meet Dennis, and I came here to meet Sophia. But as it turns out, I'm not Dennis, and you're not Sophia. Her face turned pale and she stammered, Ethan, I can explain. I smiled, though it wasn't the kind of smile I wanted to give. What an interesting situation, huh, Melissa? The room fell silent. Melissa stood there, the panic still flickering in her eyes, but she quickly pulled herself together. She was always quick on her feet. Ethan, wait, she began, her voice shaky but trying to sound calm. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow. Oh, really? Then what is it? She let out a nervous laugh, like she thought this was all just some silly misunderstanding. This is a creative experiment, she said. My editor suggested it. I needed to immerse myself in different real-life situations to write more authentically. It's for my new book. I didn't do anything wrong. This is just part of the process. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly, pretending to be someone else on Tinder, arranging a romantic meeting with a fake millionaire. That's all just a creative technique? Yes, she said, her voice gaining a bit more confidence now, like she was convincing herself as much as me. I was never going to cheat on you, Ethan. This was about research. I needed to feel what my characters feel, so I can write about it better. That's all. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt a wave of anger bubbling inside me, but I held it back, trying to stay as calm as I could. Research, huh? I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. And let me guess, in this experiment, there was no real cheating involved. Because it must be hard to write about infidelity when you've never actually done it, right? Her face reddened with rage. How dare you say that? She snapped, her voice rising. You think I would actually cheat on you? I've been working so hard on my writing, trying to make something of myself, and this is how you support me. By accusing me of something like this? Now she was on the attack, throwing the blame back at me. And by the way, she continued, her voice sharp, I'm honestly surprised, Ethan. You, of all people, pulling off something like this. This little setup? I thought you were predictable. Boring, even. I guess I underestimated you. Seems like you've been hiding some creativity after all. Her words hit hard, and I could feel the rage boiling up in her. She was turning it all around, making me the bad guy, like I had done something wrong by uncovering her secret. You don't get it, she said, her voice harsh. You're trying to make me feel guilty for something that isn't even real. You're overreacting, like always. I stood there, dumbfounded, as she tried to twist the whole situation in her favor. Suddenly, I was the fool, the one who didn't understand, the one who had crossed the line. She was good, too good at this game, but I wasn't backing down. I'm not the one pretending to be someone I'm not, Melissa, I said, my voice cold. You're the one who arranged to meet Dennis. You're the one who stepped into this mess, not me. But her anger only grew. You know what, Ethan? Maybe if you were a little more creative, a little more spontaneous, I wouldn't have had to go through these lengths for my work. You want to make me the villain here? Fine, but maybe you should look at yourself first. There it was. She had turned it all around, making me feel like the one who was out of line. I stood there, feeling the tension rise, but I had one last card to play. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. All right, Melissa, if it's all just a creative experiment, then show me your phone. Show me your Tinder conversations. Let's clear the air right now. Unless, of course, you've been talking to someone else or meeting behind my back. For a moment, she hesitated. It was brief, but I caught it. And then her face hardened, her expression shifting from anger to something more controlled, calculated. She crossed her arms and looked me square in the eye. I will not show you anything, Ethan. You're the one losing my trust. I blinked, stunned by the audacity of her words. I'm losing her trust. You're trying to make me feel guilty, she continued, her voice icy. You're hurting my pride. I'm about to release my bestseller, and people will idolize me for it. But here you are, trying to humiliate me, trying to drag me down. Ethan, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm leaving. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't just refusing to take responsibility, she was flipping the script entirely. My mind raced, trying to process it all, but before I could say anything, she turned toward the door. No, she said, pausing for a second. I'm not going home. I'm going to my friend's place. She'll understand me. You don't want to understand me. And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut, and I was left standing there, stunned by her behavior. I could still hear the echo of her voice, the coldness in her words. She had turned the whole thing on me, making me feel like the bad guy for questioning her. As I stood there, staring at the door, one thing became clear. This wasn't going to end well. It was headed for divorce. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions, but deep down, something told me this situation had already crossed the line. If Melissa had nothing to hide, she would have shown me her Tinder messages. She could have put this whole thing to rest right then and there. But she didn't, and that meant one thing. She was hiding something. My head was spinning. I couldn't make sense of it all, and the worst part? I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about her. Was she really just doing some creative experiment, or had it gone far beyond that? To you listening, what do you think? Did she cheat on me? Am I overreacting, or is divorce the right decision? My mind's been a mess since this whole thing went down, and I have a feeling it's only the beginning of what's to come. After Melissa stormed out, I stood there for a few minutes, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I needed to talk to someone, so I called Tony. True to his word, he arrived quickly, pulling up like he was on a mission. I told him everything, how Melissa had flipped the situation around, accused me of being the one in the wrong, and left without showing any proof. Tony listened quietly, his usual grin replaced by a more serious expression. Man, that's rough, he finally said, shaking his head. But you did everything right, Ethan. You called her out, and she still refused to come clean. He patted me on the back, and then his face lit up with his usual mischief. You know what? Let's not waste the opportunity. This place is expensive. I spent good money on it, and we've got it until tomorrow afternoon. Let's get drunk and brighten up this drama. I looked at him, a little exhausted from it all, but then nodded. Yeah, why not? I could use a break. Within 30 minutes, Tony was back with everything we needed. Beer, whiskey, snacks. He tried to keep the mood light, joking around to get me out of my head. It was working too. For the first time in weeks, I felt myself relaxing, even laughing at some of his ridiculous jokes. At one point, Tony smirked and said, Hey, how about this? Let's invite some girls with fake millionaire Denis's account, and when they show up, we'll just say Dennis had to leave, but his friends are here to party. I laughed at the absurdity of it, shaking my head. No need for that, man. This whole situation's crazy enough already. Tony laughed too, but there was that glint in his eye, like he was seriously thinking about pulling off something like that one day. Okay, not today, but mark my words, Ethan, one day I'm gonna try something that insane. After a few drinks, Tony didn't really offer advice on my marriage. He wasn't the type to tell me what to do in situations like this. Maybe it was because he knew that no matter what he said, the decision had to be mine. So here I am, sharing this with you, looking for your advice. What do you think I should do? Do I just walk away, file for divorce, and move on? Or do I keep trying to make sense of what happened? Honestly, my head is still spinning from all of this. Tony helped me take the edge off tonight, but tomorrow I'll still be facing the same questions. This story might continue, who knows? But for now, I'm left here with a drink in hand, and my thoughts tangled in knots.